Yes. Nothing like waking up and serving a nice cup of justice for all in the morning. Welcome back to the Sizzling Scale. I am your host, LinkKing7, and today we dive into the second game of the Ace Attorney Trilogy, Justice for All. What can I say? Coming off the back of the first game, I was completely sucked in and raring to go, so much so that I had finished this game before I even uploaded the first review. And, well, I'm not gonna sugarcoat things. This game was a step down from the first game in almost every single category. As usual, with these reviews, I'll break it down into segments so I can clearly analyze it properly. Also, I don't usually like to beg for likes, comments, shares, and subscriptions, but when someone like me tries to change the format or topics they cover, I get punished a little bit by YouTube's algorithm and I start to need help from my viewers and my community. So, if you can, I'd appreciate whatever support you'd be willing to give this video. It does mean a lot to me and it actually really helps. Anyways, this time I'm going to structure things a little bit differently. I'll put all the non-spoiler stuff first and then dive into the story spoilers after. When the time comes, I'll let you know and leave timestamps below, but let's go ahead and start off with an easy category: the music. The music in Ace Attorney 2 is actually still quite charming and nice, but this is where I have to hand the game my first objection. In this case, I really missed the dynamic tracks that I loved so much in the first game. The Pursuit theme here is considerably softer and can't even compare to Pursuit Cornered. It was a real shame because part of what hooked me into the first game's cases was that adrenaline rush that the music would give you when you get into the heated, high-tension moments of the game. One of the most underrated elements about video games in general is how developers and composers are able to synchronize their emotional moments with the appropriate music, and I just felt that it left me wanting for more here. Again, the music is great overall. I was just expecting a little bit more, and I was kind of let down. I'll also touch very quickly on the visuals here, since there's not much to say, but they're consistent with the previous game. I don't really have anything to add here. I suspect this will also probably be an identical take for the third game as well, but I'll keep it simple and say that it's still all consistently great. As for the gameplay, Justice for All brings back all of the same stuff from the first game, but adds one unique new feature called Psych Locks. Psych Locks are now found in the overworld while you're investigating certain characters who do not wish to divulge certain secrets. In order to get them to talk, you're going to have to present them with a series of items or evidence that you found along the way. Initially, I was a bit taken back by this mechanic as I thought it was going to be more annoying than it was deep, but it actually wasn't bad. As long as you thoroughly explore and talk to most of the characters, you should end up with all the stuff you need to break these Psych Locks and progress the story. It ended up being actually quite fun a lot of times, as you get a big sense of satisfaction when you're on a roll and piecing together a lot of the things and going on to break down a character's wall and get down to the real truth behind the crime. They will, however, require some backtracking, and you may need to go back and forth between a few areas before you can break these locks, but I didn't find it very intrusive or tedious at all throughout the game. Outside of that, just like the visuals, the gameplay is basically identical to the first game. Now, I could call myself to the stand and make a very clever segue about how I'm here to testify about the story, and hopefully through your cross-examination you'll feel like I'm telling the truth, but surely I'm not cringe enough to do that all, so I'll just say I want to talk about the story like normal people do. Anyways, the story here is a massive step down from the first game. I mean, I'm not even going to sit here and try and sugarcoat it. One of my original gripes with the first game, and you can go back to my first review and see that if you missed it, but it was how one of the cases in it felt like it took you away from the overarching plot, and that kind of broke my immersion with the game. Well, if I had a problem with that in the first game, this second game completely shatters my immersion. With the exception of some light connections from the second case in this game and some returning characters, it feels like it isn't even a sequel to the first one at all. Every single one of the cases is its own story. None of them are connected in any way, and they basically have no overarching plot at all to be spoken of here. I found it almost impossible to be hooked or invested from case to case because of this. I haven't played the last game in the trilogy yet as of writing the script, so I don't know how much of this is setting up for the next game and how much benefit of the doubt I can really give it, but the story here is very broken, and there's really no continuity. It's pretty weak. The only thing I can really give this game merit for doing right is actually some of the development of Phoenix Wright himself. Because of spoilers, I'll cover it in detail in the next section, but I'll just say here that our main character does get to grow a little bit across the course of the game. And I guess while we're on the topic of characters, I might as well touch on our rival prosecutor here, Franziska von Karma. Yeah, you heard that right, another von Karma. However, this time around we have a young female version with a whip of all things, and trust me, I don't need to fall into the trap of looking her up on Google Images to imagine what kind of art of her is going to be available out there. I just know. Either way, Franziska has the misfortune of not being as brutal or imposing as her father was in the game before her, nor does she have the intricate writing and character development of our main rival, Miles Edgeworth. It's just her unfortunate fate that she ended up having to grow in their shadow in a game with less screen time and poorer writing. Again, if you want to know more details, I'll cover her a bit more closely in the spoiler section coming up next. Speaking of which, time for spoilers, so you know the drill. Skip ahead to the time listed on screen if you want to avoid all that stuff. Or if you don't mind, then you can just stay with me and never leave my side because I'm insecure and I have abandonment issues. Alright, you know the drill. Let's dive into things case by case. Starting off with case 1, I actually thought we were going to be off to a promising start. Ominous music, a very unique looking character comes up, Phoenix has amnesia. It was all a very interesting setup that I thought would come through to the end of the game for us, but nope. This being a tutorial case was very short, and it didn't make use of the good character designs it had at all. I was actually quite excited to hear that this was a guy who had connections to some kind of mafia or organization, and he had actually physically attacked us. I figured maybe in this game we're going to go up against more of the mafia from case 3 of the last game, have it tie in that way, or become some sort of theme for this game, but boy was I wrong and set myself up for disappointment. All it was just another simple tutorial case with no plot relevance whatsoever. It's such a shame since I like the design of the bad guy here too. Major missed opportunity. I then moved on with Case 2, and if there's one thing I'm liking about Case 2s so far, it's their ability to be relevant and consistent with the overarching plot. Once again, we find ourselves trying to defend a Maya that has somehow found herself being our damsel in distress, and we have to save her from the clutches of the prosecution that seeks to destroy us. Except this time it's Von Karma instead of Edgeworth. This case is interesting because it takes us to the roots of the Faye family, and we go off to see their home. At their home, we meet Maya's aunt, who seems to be currently in charge, as well as her cousin, who ends up accompanying us along the next few cases. Throughout this case, I get a few more answers to the questions I had in the first game about the family and how things are going. Here we learn that their aunt, despite being the eldest daughter, does not have strong enough powers to be the inheritor of this psychic empire, so Mia and Maya's mother ended up being next in line, and the two girls by extension would then inherit it next. Their mother is still missing, and we get a few details about how in 4 years, if she does not return, the power would transfer back to their aunt, and then down to their cousin. I'm telling you all this because these details are important, and because that's really all they give us, as the case goes in a completely different direction to this overall, but it left a standing impression in the back of my head, and I wonder more about the family dynamics here and how this contributes to the narrative. Outside of that, the case itself is very lackluster. The perpetrator is very obvious right away, and I found myself having no difficulty at all figuring things out and piecing together the evidence. Just looking back at the first game, I recall flip-flopping between suspects and not really being sure who committed the crime or what to think, but here it felt like a no-brainer. Yet, this case gets a pass purely for the plot relevance of it. And then we get to Case 3. If this sentence sounds familiar, it's because it is, and that's exactly what I said in my first review, or something along those lines anyways. The comments section has also kindly let me know that Case 3s in general are a bit of an issue in this series, as they tend to be a step away from the main plot, and normally I'd have a problem with this, as most people seem to. But I might actually go as far as to say Case 3 was my favorite case in this game. That's not exactly heaping big praise on it, as I was disappointed by all of the cases, but I'll explain why. This case is an absolute clown show, and yes, I mean that quite literally. It takes place at the circus. And so by that nature, you're going to meet a bunch of extremely quirky individuals here who are modeled after some of the most extreme stereotypes you can get at a circus. This results in it probably having some of the most detestable characters in the game so far, but I found myself being drawn to two main things in this case that make it good. The first was how the murder was committed. To me, it wasn't super obvious until the pieces really started to fall together as to the exact mechanism of the murder. The murderer, though, is a totally different matter. Just like Case 2, this was completely obvious just because of how things were set up. But I find myself being able to look past that because, for the first time in this series, as I saw this person exposed for their guilt, I couldn't help but sit here and feel bad for them. Their backstory was tragically heartbreaking. The circumstances that led to the murder were overly unfortunate. They felt remorse, guilt, and shame. The character just felt real. They weren't outright evil, they were just a person who was dealt a very unfortunate hand, didn't know how to deal with it right, and made a few mistakes in the process. The writing of this character shone through to me like a bright light and was one of the highlights of this game for sure. Also, our defendant reminds me of Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter, so they get bonus points for that here too. I don't know, maybe I just had super low expectations from a filler case, but the way in which the murderer was portrayed really worked for me and was enough to keep me intrigued about the case despite a lot of terrible personalities like Regina. I think she might be even more unlikable than Old Bag, but the verdict's still out on that one. And speaking of Old Bag, she's back. To my absolute horror, Case 4 brings with it two of the more annoying characters from the first game. Lot of Heart and Old Bag. I'm sorry if you're a fan of either, but after a while, the trope that these characters are using just isn't funny or quirky anymore, and it starts to make me dread having to go back and talk to them in order to progress the case. I know I'm not the only one who can find themselves invested in a certain case point, be redirected to something they really hate doing, and then all of a sudden just detaching and getting up and taking a break. This is how I felt every time I had to go talk to Old Bag or Lot of Heart in this case, and I think it brought it down in quality for me personally. I know this case is a major fan favorite, so I'll talk about it in more detail. If you're trying to dodge major spoilers, I suggest you stop here and skip the rest of this case since there's really no way for me to review it fairly in a way that's totally free of major spoilers. Before I even knew or started this case, I had gone through 8 total cases in Ace Attorney games so far. But in the back of my head, I had a burning question I wanted to ask that I kept suppressing. And that was, will we ever have to defend someone who is actually guilty? Well, I'm glad I never asked that question because if there's one thing that this case really does right, it's that the answer to that question is a yes. Our defendant this time has indirectly set up the murder of one of his colleagues through an assassin. This assassin specialized in never being caught, and his clients always getting off the hook. Fantastic. And like I said in the beginning of this video, if there's one good thing that this game does right, it's that it adds a lot of growth to our main man, Phoenix. And this case was definitely one of them. Throughout the case, he is being constantly blackmailed in order to get Matt on guard, our client, a not guilty ruling through the kidnapping of Maya by the same assassin who committed the murder. Phoenix constantly struggles with the thought of having to do the right thing, which is find the truth and get a fair verdict, versus saving his partner and a close friend, as well as the general nature of doing his job as a defense attorney. In the end, we do lose this case, though I say lose very lightly as the ending in and of itself turns out to be very satisfying, but it serves as a major growth point for Phoenix's character. And I think overall it's quite strong character-wise. And while we're talking about characters, it's also a major growing point for Von Karma, as well as the rival we all know and love so much, Miles Edgeworth. Edgeworth shows up in this case after Von Karma gets shot in the shoulder and is no longer able to prosecute. I honestly thought that was kind of a weird plot point just to bring Edgeworth back, but it is what it is. He comes and he takes the stand and really pushes Phoenix's development in the last section of the case. And this is where we come to the few issues I had with this case. I think one of the major ones was the fact that I still had PTSD from the Steel Samurai setting in Case 1-3, as well as the association with Lot of Heart and Old Bag, but the other had to do with some of the major inconsistencies I felt that the storytelling had. One major detail that stood out to me was that at one point, Matt Onguard, our client, asks you to go to his house to feed the cat because there's no one there to do it for him. But when you get there, all of a sudden there's a butler who's there to greet you. This is a problem for 2 reasons. One, why would Onguard send you to his house with a butler who was there, who he probably knows is already there? And 2, why would Phoenix Wright not immediately find this suspicious? I'm usually someone who plays games very loosely and lets things happen as they come, but this little detail was almost impossible for me to ignore. Add to that the fact that the dude with the zipper down the middle of his face out here looking like the second coming of Frankenstein's monster isn't exactly the most innocent image in the photo album. Outside of that, this case is another one where we don't really have a connection to the main narrative at all, and despite it having a nice twist and being a decent case overall, it just hammers home the disconnect from the plot once more. And that's where the game ended, leaving me very conflicted. There's a nice post-case interaction between Edgeworth and Von Karma that I personally really enjoyed, but outside of that, I felt like this game was a large bag of missed opportunities that didn't quite hit as hard as the first game did. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed playing it quite a bit. It was definitely a lot of fun, but like I mentioned in my intro, it was a step down from the very powerful start that the trilogy had in the first game. And that's pretty much how I feel about it, so without wasting much more time, I'm gonna call this game at a 6 out of 10 on the sizzling scale. Considering it's part of the package deal of getting the whole trilogy, I don't think you lose any value in playing it, but I just wish it had done a lot of things better, so I can't really score it any higher than that. Having said all of that, I know I dragged my feet on this video for a bit, but I've been trying to work on a lot of different content ideas for the channel to kind of revive it a little bit. But I've finished with the third game in the series now, and I promise that video will come out soon, so until then, take care everyone, and I'll catch you all on Saturday in my next video. Peace!